Hello, Councilman Rasmussen here, coming to you. This is my third in a series of videos that I'm making calling Budget Conversations. The idea of each one of these videos is to dig deeper into one of the major drivers of the town budget and some of the budget concerns that we've had in the last, well, for a number of years, but really that sort of came to a head this year. To help people understand a little bit better about sort of the complexities of the challenges that the town faces when making budget decisions, when planning for operations of the town, when planning for capital needs of the town, and ultimately those things, how they play out in terms of our tax rate and the growth and changes that you see in our community. I've done videos already on our pension system and some of the needs and challenges that we have with that. And on the tax rates and tax assessments and the difference between tax assessments and tax rates and how that plays out between the town and the county. So check out those videos if you haven't already. So this video I want to focus on new developments. We've obviously gotten a lot of conversations at our council meetings. People come and want to talk about and want to know about the new developments as we've gone through our comprehensive plan and just completed yesterday the comprehensive zoning updates that we've been required to do for a very long time. A big question that comes up is new developments. Why? Why do we have them? Who pays for them? What are the costs? What are the impacts on our community? And this is a really, really complicated thing. For a very long time, Smyrna was a really, really small town. We're talking hundreds of years. Smyrna was a really small town, a square mile that is basically the downtown where I live and where my business is. But it started to grow. And you can actually see the true timeline of all of this if you want to really dig in and read the comprehensive plan. It's on the town website. It's a neat history, a picture of how this community has changed and evolved over time. But it started to grow in the 20th century. In the mid-20th century, you see it starting to expand out. You see neighborhoods built, a little bit further south down to the lake. You see more properties right around the core of our community. But in general, Smyrna was a lot of what people remember as Smyrna. Kind of picture from Duck Creek to the lake. It wasn't until the 1990s, and really the late 1990s and the early 2000s, that we see a lot of the changes that have happened in this community that I think people are worried about or concerned about as they play out today. It is in that time period that the town decided to annex quite a bit of property, farms mostly, to the south west of town and directly north of town. So to the southwest, we're talking about out on the other side of Carter Road, on the west side of Carter Road, out Sunnyside, down to Brentford Road, out to Robert Chase, that area that's out there where there's obviously been a lot of development. And then to the north of town, what we're talking about is pretty much from Duck Creek up to where Duck Creek Parkway runs into Route 13 and Route 1, that kind of triangle that forms the top portion of the town. And, I wasn't around. I'm not sure all the conversations and the thinking that went into it, but it was right around that time that a lot of towns were seeing a lot of residential growth and the opportunity to for the farmers, the people who owned those properties, to be able to sell their properties for quite a bit of money. Was really reliant on the idea that if someone was going to build homes in those areas, they needed to be able to provide water, sewer, and electric service to them. At the time, we were quite a ways away from, any of the major water and sewer and electric providers here in the state. So the town of Smyrna, because we have our own water, sewer, and electric systems, had the opportunity to, if we annexed those properties into our town, we could then provide services to those new developments. A decision was made somewhere back then to annex those properties into town, and in doing so, the town committed itself legally to allowing those pieces of property to be developed for residential uses, mostly. Annexation is a pretty complicated process, especially like that. It involves the state and the counties getting involved. In fact, Smyrna was apparently sued by the state because they did not like our annexing some of these properties. The details of that are also kind of lost to me, but folks probably might remember some of that. But you can imagine the farmers who own those properties, they agree to have their property annexed into town so that they can ultimately sell that property to developers. The developers agree to purchase that property based on the town's promise that we will extend water, sewer, and electric service to those properties. We are legally required to provide those services. That's why one of the questions people get is just don't approve new developments. That's not going to happen. That might sound nice, but if those developers who bought that property based on the town's promise that we would provide water, sewer, and electric, if we just said, no, we're just not going to do it, they'd sue the town, rightfully so, right? They're out potentially tens, hundreds of millions of dollars of profit from the development of those areas that they agreed to based on the town's promise. And in all likelihood, they'd win because the town wouldn't be living up to our legal obligations. It's the reason why, as much as, not all of us would agree with that, that we don't necessarily want to grow as much as the folks 20-some years ago thought we should grow, we don't have a choice. Basically, we need to extend those services because we legally agreed to do so already, and those developers purchased that property with that legal agreement as a fallback. So, what happens, right? Because 2004-ish, right? Everything is going really well. There's lots and lots of growth. There's lots and lots of development happening, and Smyrna has brought these properties in. The developers put forward their plans. In most cases, those plans were approved. And we're talking about suburban developments that might look like Wicksfield or some of the stuff that you see out in Clayton or to that southwest area in town, Hickory Hollow, those areas, right? Pretty classic suburban development. To be honest, those suburban developments are a source of a lot of complaints that the town gets because of things like really wide parkways where people fly through them. They're little race courses through some of these communities, but that's how they were designed. Not having sidewalks because that was perfectly acceptable if the properties were large enough and they were laid out a certain way. Having only one entry point and one exit point, so all the traffic has to go through one interchange. Those are really common infrastructure complaints that the town hears about from some of these communities. Then there's other things like, the developer said that they were going to put in a pool, but the pool is this tiny little thing. Or they said there was going to be a clubhouse, but the clubhouse isn't really a clubhouse. At the time, the town didn't have a lot of knowledge and sophistication around holding developers accountable to what it is that they said and really what we ought to be asking for in the way of quality development for our community. But we've learned a lot in the last 20 years. Some of that is in how we do things like bond the projects to make sure that work gets completed on a timely manner and in an efficient way. Some of it is about changing standards, so sidewalk standards, road standards, widths, things like that have been updated over the years to make sure that there's better interconnectivity and better walkability in some of these communities. And then some of it is just philosophical changes. If you can imagine a lot of the developments that happened in that early part of the late 90s and the early 2000s were pretty large lots, pretty large homes on pretty large lots that were fairly spread out in cul-de-sacs and things like that. If you take a big property, say you take 500 acres of land and you develop it into 1 acre lots or 3/4 acre lots with the roads and things going around it, you're going to end up with, 350, 400 homes or something like that on that property. Those homes have to be pretty large in order for the developer to make the kind of money that they need off of them. And they're generally going to be beyond the price range of the vast majority of, especially young people, right? Your young teachers, your new college grads, your young families, your two working class parents trying to find a place where they can raise their first kids. Those are big houses, and they cost a lot of money, and the developers know that because they can only fit a certain number. The reality is that what people want for homes has changed. People want a better mix of more affordable and diverse housing. That means things like townhouses, things like apartments, things like duplexes, things like smaller single-family homes, and also larger single-family homes. So instead of having developments that all look cookie cutter, same size house, maybe there's 3 models or 4 models, the thinking in suburban development has now moved to what we call, there's different terms for this, but we call it a mixed residential sort of developments. Those are, instead of just approving a development with one type of housing, requiring developers to put in multiple types of housing and requiring developers to put in a lot more amenities for the people in those communities. So not some tiny little pool that only a few people can use, or a clubhouse that's more like a meeting room. We're talking larger playgrounds, larger meeting spaces, larger pools, dog parks, walking trails, community gardens, these types of amenities that make for a much better community and a much more engaged community, as well as things that help out for public safety, more ways in and out of a community, more interconnectivity between communities, so that if there's a fire, police and fire and ambulance or something can come from a lot of different directions and reach that community as quickly as possible. Those are all some of the philosophical changes in the way developments look that have been infused into a lot of our comprehensive plan, a lot of the conversation we've had around development and rezoning. So that's why you've seen the Plan Village community standards, zoning standards be implemented to the north side of town in that development that hadn't happened yet, as well as to some of the southwest side of town for developments that haven't started in those areas yet. So to go back to 2004, 2005, a lot of building, the town approves the design, that old suburban development design for these lots, and then the housing crash, and the developers who had been working on those areas pretty much stop. Actually, Smyrna continues to grow, but nowhere near as fast as it had been imagined that it would grow. And unfortunately, with that, we also stopped planning and thinking about the infrastructure needs that we have to have in place for those communities. If everything's just sitting there in its farm fields, it's hard to imagine that you need to be spending lots of money building things like a water tower or an electric substation, providing sewer connectivity to the rest of the community, because there's no houses there. But eventually, there's going to be houses there. And just because the housing crash stopped things for a while doesn't mean it was smart of us to stop planning for those eventual needs in those areas. This is around the time where we stopped putting money into our capital projects. We started, rather than raising taxes, we started taking more and more money that should have been being used for capital projects, and we started using it to offset tax increases in the community. And over years and years and years, we stopped having the resources that we might have had up front to build that infrastructure. And that's where we get to today. There's a certain reality. Some of the infrastructure that is going to be in those communities is going to be paid for by the developers. And that happens in a couple of different ways. One is, some of it is just stuff they are required to put in because they want to develop their property. It's infrastructure they're building on their property. Some of it is the stuff that really the town has some responsibility for, but we wouldn't be doing it if it wasn't because of that new development. And there's negotiations that happen between developers and the community, and they happen a lot around what are called impact fees. That for every new house that's going to be built, there's water impact fees, sewer impact fees, electric impact fees, parks impact fees, police impact fees, fire and ambulance impact fees. These are all costs that are borne by the developer to offset the capital needs of providing services to those communities. Capital needs is, sometimes that's water, sewer, and pipes under the ground, or electric, transformers. It could be building a new substation for the ambulance department and the police department. It could be buying new police cars because you need to be driving in those communities. It could be buying a new fire engine. These are the capital needs. It's not the day-to-day operations, paying the electric bill or paying salaries. It is buying the physical stuff that you need to provide those services. So we've actually gone through and we've updated how we do our impact fees to make sure that we are better capturing the true costs of that. We're working with the fire department and the ambulance 64 to update their impact fees so that they are getting the resources that they need. And we're even working with the school district to make sure the school district updates its impact fees so that the school district has more of the capital funds necessary. As more houses are built, more families move in, there need to be schools to provide education for those people. So impact fees is a big piece of that, and we've actually done a lot of work in the last 2 years really to better implement impact fees to represent the true capital needs of our community. Those are the kind of things that should be updated every few years. In many cases, these haven't been updated since that 2004, 2006 timeframe. And then there are the costs that impact fees really aren't going to pay for. These are the things that the town needs to plan for a long period of time, and in some cases needs to take out debt in order to pay for. Something like a water tower, right? That's a potentially closer to $6 million project. It's unlikely that a town ever has $5 or $6 million for a new project just sitting in the bank waiting to pull the trigger. But we have the ability to go out and raise debt through bond financing, and that's a pretty typical way that things like that happen. We're going to need a new electric substation, not just for residential growth, but as we want to see more commercial growth up on the North 13 corridor, the Duck Creek Business Campus, and things like that. There are potentially a lot more electric demands than our current substation can meet. And we will need a new electric substation on the north side of town. Those are big costs. I mean, those two projects, the water tower and electric substation, is more than $20 million right there, just for those two things. And those are really costs that are borne by the town because we are the utility provider. In an ideal world, we would have been saving money out of our water, sewer, and electric fees for the last 15, 20 years to pay for these projects. But we didn't. We started taking on more debt. We kept our tax rate very, very low in order to take as much money out of water and sewer as possible. We had to keep that tax rate low, we had to take all the money out of our water and sewer and electric utilities as possible to keep that there. And it left us in a spot where we have no capital reserves whatsoever as a town. That's really bad. Right? If we have a failure, if there's a sewer line failure or a water line failure, we have to pay that either out of our current operating budget, which is very, very thin, or we have to bring on debt. And really it's debt that we've done. We've accumulated $24 million in debt at this point around capital projects that probably could have been a lot less if we had been actively planning for our capital infrastructure needs and raising our taxes over time to cover our operating expenses as a town. We can't go back in time. If you got a time machine, bring it out here, we'll do this. But the reality of it is that we have to address this problem now because it only gets worse, right? We have to provide those utilities. We are legally obligated to do so, and in not doing so, we would put ourselves in grave financial position. We would be sued. We would have to put them in eventually after we got sued. We could potentially be sued for lost revenue and a variety of other things. And ultimately, those are things that would hurt the town far worse than figuring out how to pay our bills today because we've got to do it anyway. I know that not everybody wants to hear that. People think that we should stand up. I've heard this lots of times. Stand up to the developers. Don't let them build. But legally, that ship sailed 20 years ago. and so we now, this council, has to deal with the real today ramifications of that, not the wishful thinking for the last 20 years if we wouldn't have approved those developments, or if we would have raised the taxes the right way and saved all of that money and built that infrastructure as we should have. We don't get to play that game. We have to play the solve the problem today game. So we are negotiating actively with the developers for all of those properties to make sure that we, one, are getting the best homes and the best housing and the best communities as possible for the people who will eventually be our neighbors, and that we are able to make sure that the developers pay as much as we can possibly get them to pay of those infrastructure costs that are going to impact our community. One way or the other, there's going to be costs to the town, and we are going to have to probably borrow even more money because the timeline of these things, we don't have the savings to go out and pay for it. We'll certainly be pursuing things like bonds, bond bill funds from the state. There are federal earmarks. There are other ways that we can go out trying to find these resources. But to be honest, if we don't have any money to put up, right? If you've got no skin in the game, you can't go out and buy a house anymore with $0 down. No one's going to finance a $15 million or give us money for a $15 million substation if we don't have a penny to put up to help. So we have to make these changes, and ideally we try and limit the impact of these capital needs as best as we can by being much more strategic than we have in the past. But these developments are coming, and we're legally obligated to make sure that we provide the utilities for them. There are, a lot of questions there. Will there be new schools? Where will they be? Will there need to be, new fire and ambulance services? What would that need to look like? They're very, very complicated things, and those are all part of those conversations that happen with developers. I know it doesn't make everybody happy. People would love it if the small towns never grew. The population of our country keeps growing. The population of our town keeps growing right along with it. And in the end, we're going to have new neighbors. We want those new neighbors to have the best quality of life as possible, because that means that they're going to be the kind of folks we want as neighbors. They're going to be engaged in our community. Their kids are going to be here, playing on our sports teams and being involved in our service activities. Hopefully these are people who are volunteering for our fire department, that they are people who are, participating in our events here in this community as part of our civic organizations, our religious organizations. We want the best we can provide for our town, and we have to change the way we work in order to make that happen. So new developments are a tricky thing. There's a lot that goes into it. As with any of these videos, please, if you have questions, reach out, ask, come to meetings, read the comprehensive plan if you need something to help put you to sleep at night. There's a lot of cool statistics in there if you're a public policy nerd. But please reach out. Share these videos with folks who have questions about why are we going to see this new development. Maybe this will help them understand a little bit better. And definitely, you can find me. I'm pretty easy to find. I'm downtown. I'm at the council meetings. All my contact information is on the town website. You can find me through Facebook here. Let me know. As I said, this is the third of the videos that I'm doing. I'm going to also be doing a couple more videos. I'm going to do one on utilities. I'm going to do one on economic development. And I've already done one on pensions and one on the tax assessment and tax rates. So check those out. I'm going to keep getting as many of these up as I can. And if I get questions for people, I will try and address those in additional videos. My goal is to have a repository of information that people can turn to when they have questions. They can share it with their friends and family. Thank you as always, and take care.